In 1959, Chuck Berry wrote a letter, sealed it, and told his daughter she would know when to open it. 40 years later, she did. What was inside changed everything she thought she knew about her father and about herself. It was December 3, 1959, and Chuck Berry was 33 years old. 3 weeks earlier, federal agents had arrested him at his home in Wentzville, Missouri, on charges under the Mann Act, a federal statute that had been used selectively and unevenly against black men in American public life since its passage in 1910. The arrest had come at the worst possible moment in the worst possible year. Chuck had spent the 1950s building something from nothing: a musical career, a family, a home, a recording contract, and a piece of land in Missouri that he had purchased and was developing into a venue and retreat he called Berry Park. All of it now sat in the shadow of a federal indictment that carried the possibility of a prison sentence. Chuck's wife, Themetta, whom everyone called Toddy, was 32 years old that December and was managing the household in Wentzville while Chuck continued to fulfill concert obligations that his booking agency refused to cancel, understanding that canceled shows meant forfeited income at a moment when the family needed every dollar they could account for. Their children were young. Their oldest daughter, Darlene Ingrid Berry, was 8 years old. Their second daughter, Aloha Issa Berry, was 6. Their son, Charles Berry Jr., was 4. Their youngest child would come later. The household that December was simultaneously as normal as any household with young children in winter in Missouri, and as quietly frightened as any family waiting to learn what a federal prosecution would mean for the years ahead. Chuck was not a man who spoke easily about fear or about love, and in his experience, the two things often occupied the same space inside a person, though he would not have used those words to describe it. People who knew him in that era described a person of enormous personal discipline, punctual in ways that people who worked with him consistently remarked on, methodical in his financial dealings to a degree that his accountants found unusual in a performer of his era, precise in his public conduct, and guarded in his emotional life in the way that black men in America who had built something real from scratch often had to be, understanding that visibility brought scrutiny and that scrutiny brought risk. The scrutiny had found him anyway in November of 1959, and he was aware, sitting at his writing desk that December night, that the risks he had been careful about for his entire adult life had materialized in a form he had not fully anticipated. He had grown up in St. Louis in a family that prized 3 things: education, dignity, and self-reliance. His father, Henry William Berry, had been a carpenter and janitor who worked multiple jobs to keep his 6 children in school and in church, and moving forward. His mother, Martha Bell Banks, had taught Sunday school and kept the household, and instilled in her children a specific understanding of the relationship between private character and public conduct, that what you were in private was the foundation of everything you could become in public, and that the foundation had to be built carefully and maintained deliberately. Chuck had absorbed this understanding completely. It was, in some essential way, the architecture of everything he had built. He had built his career through a combination of genuine musical genius and relentless practical intelligence. He had written his own songs at a time when many performers relied on professional songwriters. He had negotiated his own contracts with close attention to detail, unusual in an era when record companies routinely took advantage of artists, particularly black artists. He had purchased land. He had built things on the land. He had invested in infrastructure rather than appearances. And now in December of 1959, the federal government was treating his conduct as a criminal matter, and Chuck Berry was 33 years old and sitting alone at his writing desk and writing a letter to his 8-year-old daughter because he needed her to know something He could not say to her face yet, because she was 8 years old, and some things require age before they can land correctly. The arrest had come on November 28th, 3 weeks before Chuck sat down to write. Federal agents had come to Wentzville, and the charge under the Mann Act was one that Chuck's attorneys were already telling him would be difficult to contest, because the law was broad, because the federal prosecutor was aggressive, and because a famous black man in America in 1959 was not the same thing as a famous white man before a federal jury. Chuck understood this without illusion. What he did not want Darlin to understand, not yet, not at 8 years old, not until she was old enough to hold it properly, was what the next few years were going to look like, and what they would cost the family, and what they would do to the version of her father she had known up to that point. He did not want to explain it. He wanted her to have something she could open when she was old enough to know that difficult years are not the definition of a person, and that what a person does with the difficult years is. But on December 3rd, 1959, 3 weeks into the most dangerous chapter of his life to that point, Chuck Berry sat down at the writing desk in the small study he kept off the main bedroom at the Wentzville house and wrote a letter. He wrote it by hand in the careful and legible script he had developed in school and had never allowed to become careless, on 3 sheets of plain white writing paper that he took from the top drawer of the writing desk. He wrote without stopping, without crossing anything out, without revising a single word that he had set down. He was not a man who revised his way to clarity. He was a man who thought until he was clear and then put the words down in the order they arrived, which was the same way he composed music. He had finished 3 cups of coffee by the time he finished the letter. He folded the 3 pages together when he had finished, creased the fold with the side of his thumb, the way he had been taught in school, and sealed them in a white envelope that he pressed shut with deliberate care. He wrote on the outside of the envelope, in the same careful hand, "For Darlin, open this when you understand what waiting means." He did not explain what he meant by that instruction to anyone. He did not tell Darlin, who was 8 years old and asleep down the hall, that he had written it. He did not tell Fometa what was inside it, though he told her it existed and precisely where he was going to keep it. In the small mahogany box he kept in the top drawer of his writing desk, beneath a copy of his recording contract with Chess Records, and his original deed to the Berry Park property. He told Fometa, "If something happens to me and Darlin comes looking for this, make sure she finds it." Fometa, who had been married to Chuck since 1948, and who had learned over 11 years exactly which register of his voice contained the things that were most important to him, did not ask what something means or when. She simply said she would. Chuck nodded once, put the envelope in the mahogany box, and went to bed. Nothing happened to Chuck in the immediate sense that the word suggests. He was convicted in the Mann Act case in 1961 and served a federal prison sentence of approximately 20 months at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. An experience that people who knew Chuck before and after consistently described as a dividing line in his personality, a before and an after. The before being a man who was guarded but occasionally open, and the after being a man who had drawn certain shutters permanently closed. He returned home in 1963, resumed his career with the focused, contractual, one-show-at-a-time professionalism that would define the second half of his career, and said very little publicly or privately about what the preceding 4 years had done to him. The letter in the mahogany box sat untouched for 40 years. Darlin Ingrid Berry grew up in Wentzville and in the particular atmosphere of a household where one parent was famous in a way that created its own peculiar set of pressures and silences. Fame, when you live inside it as a child, is not the thing it appears to be from the outside. From the outside, it looks like brightness, abundance, access, arrival. From the inside, it sometimes looks like a father who is there and then is gone, and then is there again. and whose public face is so fully formed and so carefully maintained that the private face, the one you see at breakfast, the one you see when he is tired, the one you see when he thinks nobody is watching him from the hallway, becomes the precious and guarded thing, the version of him that belongs only to the family. She watched her father leave for shows and return from shows and sit at his writing desk and walk Barry Park's grounds in the early morning and play guitar alone in the living room on Sunday afternoons in a way that suggested the guitar was less entertainment and more necessity, the way some people pray or run or cook or tend a garden. She watched him be publicly warm with audiences at Barry Park during its summer seasons and privately reserved in the house during the remaining months, in ways that she had learned, by the time she was a teenager, not to mistake for distance. He was not distant, he was private, which is a different thing entirely, and she had understood the difference before she had words for it. She had known about the letter since her early teens, when Themeta told her it existed and where to find it, and what her father had written on the outside. Themeta had told her in the matter-of-fact tone she used for information she considered important, but did not want to dramatize. The same tone in which she told Darlin other significant things about the family's history and the family's circumstances. The tone that said, "This is real, this is yours, and when the time comes, you will know what to do with it." She had held the envelope once, when she was 17 years old, standing at her father's writing desk on a Tuesday afternoon when the house was quiet and her parents were somewhere on the Barry Park grounds. She had lifted the mahogany box from the drawer, opened it, and removed the white envelope, which had already yellowed slightly at the edges even then. She had turned it over in her hands, feeling the 3 folded pages inside through the paper, heavier than she had expected, the weight of 3 full handwritten sheets, more substantial than the weight of an envelope in ordinary experience. She had read the outside again. For Darlin. Open this when you understand what waiting means. She had set it back in the mahogany box without opening it, and she had set it back not because she lacked the courage to open it, but because the instruction on the outside had remained in her mind since her mother first described it. And at 17, Darlin Barry was honest enough with herself to know that she did not yet understand what waiting means, not in the sense her father had intended, not in whatever sense had required him to write a letter and seal it, and trust that the distance between the writing and the reading would do something necessary. Over the following years, the letter's presence in the house existed in Darlin's mind as a kind of quiet constant. She thought about it in her mid-20s when she was raising her own children and discovered what it felt like to love someone completely while being unable to explain to them the full depth of that love in any form they could receive. She thought about it in her 30s when she encountered the specific kind of patience that long commitments require, the patience not of waiting for something to arrive, but of continuing to invest in something whose value is not yet visible. She thought about it each time she visited the house in Wentzville and passed the study door, knowing the mahogany box was in the top drawer of the writing desk on the other side of it. But each time she measured herself against the instruction on the envelope, she reached the same quiet conclusion. Not yet. She was not ready. It was January 18th, 1999, a Monday morning, 8 days after Chuck Berry's 72nd birthday. Darlin was 58 years old. She had driven to Wentzville from her home in St. Louis County early that morning, arriving before anyone else, letting herself in with the key she had always kept. The house was quiet. Chuck and Themeta were not home. Darlin had come to pick up some family documents her parents had asked her to retrieve, and she found herself standing in the study with the small mahogany box open in her hands. She stood there for a long time before she took the envelope out. She stood there because she was doing what she had always done when she came near it, measuring herself against the instruction, asking the internal question the envelope had always prompted. The same question she had been asking for over 40 years. Openness when you understand what waiting means. And standing in the study on that January morning, 58 years old, the winter light coming through the window at the same angle it always came in January and falling on the same writing desk in the same floor, and the same bare trees along the Barry Park boundary, Darlin Barry understood that she was finally ready. Not because 40 years had passed, not because she was old, but because she could feel, with a precision she had never felt before, exactly what her father had meant by waiting. Not the absence of action, not the absence of movement, but the specific quality of continuing to believe in something you are building when you cannot yet see its full shape. She had lived long enough to know that feeling from the inside. She had earned it. She sat down in her father's writing chair, the same chair he sat in when he went over his accounts, and when he wrote his correspondence, and when he played guitar alone on Sunday afternoons, and she opened the envelope. The 3 pages inside were in her father's handwriting, which she had known her entire life. The careful, deliberate script that was exactly like him in its refusal to be careless. The ink had faded from black to a warm brown over 40 years, but every word was fully legible. She read the letter straight through without stopping, her eyes moving down each page steadily, the way she had always read, without rushing, without skipping ahead, trusting that everything she needed was in the order it was given. When she finished the 3rd page, she sat for a long time without moving. Her hands held the pages in her lap. Through the study window, the bare winter trees along the Barry Park property stood in the thin January light. The same trees she had looked at her entire life from this window, and from the window of her childhood bedroom down the hall. Trees she had watched in every season over 5 decades, without their presence ever becoming ordinary. The letter contained something she had not prepared herself for, even in 40 years of wondering about it. She had imagined many versions of it, a confession, an explanation, a reckoning, an apology, a statement of pride. She had not imagined what was actually there. What the letter contained was her father in full. Not the public version, not the guarded version, but the version that existed behind both of those. The version that the writing desk and the Sunday afternoons with the guitar and the early morning walks along Barry Park had always hinted at, but never fully revealed. It was a letter from a man who was 33 years old and facing the most dangerous months of his life, and who had chosen to spend those hours not documenting his fears or his anger, but writing to his daughter about a Saturday morning when she was 5 years old, when she had sat beside him on the living room floor while he played guitar, and had listened with a stillness and seriousness that had stopped him mid-phrase, because in that moment he had understood something about who she was going to be. He wrote about the music and what it had taught him about patience, that a song is built in the silences between the notes as much as in the notes themselves, and that the waiting is not empty time. It is the time during which the work is becoming what it needs to be. He wrote that he was living inside a long silence in December of 1959, and that he was trusting in what he was building. He wrote the final paragraph in 4 sentences that said the things he did not know how to say out loud. That he loved her completely, that he had always believed in her completely, and that he always would, even across all the years and all the silences in which he may not have said it in a way she could hear. Darlin Barry sat in her father's chair for a very long time after she finished reading. The pages rested in her lap. The January light moved slowly across the study floor. She did not try to stop what was happening on her face, because there was nothing to stop. It was simply what happened when something that had been waiting inside you for the right moment finally finds it. She drove back to her house in St. Louis County that Monday morning with the envelope in her bag and called her father that evening. She said, simply, "I read it, Daddy. I finally read it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Chuck Barry said, quietly, the way he said the things that mattered to him. I know. I've been waiting too. If this extraordinary story of a father's love and a lifetime of patient waiting moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with anyone who has ever received something from a parent that arrived exactly when they needed it, or with anyone who is still waiting for the right moment to say the thing they most need to say. Have you ever found words from someone you love that you weren't ready to hear until exactly the right moment? Tell us about it in the comments. Ring that notification bell, because the most important letters in the world are the ones that were sealed with trust and opened with tears.